All right, well, welcome everyone. My name is Stephen Gastire, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you to um, uh, is my great pleasure to welcome you this evening to our virtual presentation on water justice in commemoration of World Water Day. This session is jointly sponsored by the Greater Lansing United Nations Association and the Greater Detroit United Nations Association. And so I would like to first introduce the president of those organizations. Belinda Evans-Ebbio is the director of the Greater Detroit United Nations Association. Linda, would you like to just say a word, say hello to everyone?
Well, hello, everyone, and hello, especially those that are from out of town. I see North Carolina is on with us. Thank you. And I'll have more to say later on. Thank you, but welcome.
And Denise Quarles is the president of the Greater Lansing United Nations Association. Denise? Denise, did you just want to say hello to everyone?
Sorry, I had to unmute. Greetings, everyone. And I wanted to, on behalf of the Greater Lansing United Nations Association, welcome you for a very important discussion on water justice. Thank you for joining us.
Wonderful. Well, before we go any further, I think I would like to welcome you all, but also I think it's important to give a land acknowledgement. If you could advance to the second slide, please. So we collectively acknowledge that we in mid-Michigan occupy the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe Three Fires Confederacy of Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi peoples. In particular, Michigan State University, where I work, resides on land ceded in the 1819 Treaty of Saginaw. We recognize, support, and advocate for the sovereignty of Michigan's 12 federally recognized Indian nations, for historic indigenous communities in Michigan, for indigenous individuals and communities who live here now, and for those who were forcibly removed from their homelands. By offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm indigenous sovereignty and will work to hold Michigan State University and the state of Michigan more accountable to the needs of American Indians and indigenous peoples. Thank you so much. So I think today's event comes on the eve of the occasion of World Water Day. World Water Day was established or was called for at the 1992 Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro, and then was affirmed by the United Nations General Assembly in 1993. World Water Day is a day when people come together to recognize both the importance of water to all of us and to recognize and to raise awareness about the ongoing struggles to achieve water for all, which has become a major goal of the United Nations as an institution. We will talk about some of those mechanisms as we go through today. The theme of World Water Day this year is actually water for peace. And the notion is that water can be something that pulls us apart, that creates conflicts, but can also be something that around which we come together. However, and we will note in terms of our theme for this evening, that while it is important to think of water for peace, we all recognize, those of us in Michigan and around the world, that peace is not peace without justice. So we themed our discussion this evening around water justice. So with that, I would like to introduce our three esteemed panelists for this evening. Maureen Taylor is chair of the Michigan Welfare Rights Organization since 1993. She leads campaigns advocating for the rights of low-income Detroiters, notably spearheading efforts to protect against utility water shutoffs and negotiating the water affordability plan for Detroit Water and Sewerage Department. She has also consulted on award-winning documentaries highlighting water rights and affordability issues, both locally and globally. If you just say hello to our audience, Maureen.
Good afternoon. I guess it's evening for some of you. And I just saw a few names pop up of folks I know that are on this call. All righty. Thank you for including welfare rights. Glad to be here.
Wonderful. Our second esteemed speaker is Tula Ngasala. She is a civil and water resources engineer with expertise in water security and sanitation. And in her work, she bridges academic research from Michigan State University with field implementations in low and middle income countries, particularly focusing on water infrastructure's impact on gender roles and educational attainment in rural Tanzania. Tula, would you like to say hello?
Yes, thank you so much for the introduction, and hello everyone. Thank you for being here, and I'm looking forward to a good discussion.
Wonderful. And last but certainly not least is Emma Rice, who is a social science researcher who investigates equity and food security at the Water, Food, and Energy Nexus, focusing on freshwater fisheries worldwide. Guided by resilience theory and a commitment to ethical community engagement, she is an Institute for Critical Technology and Applied Social Science doctoral scholar at Virginia Tech with previous experience at the UN, the White House Council on Environmental Quality, and the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy. Emma, would you like to say just a greeting before we get going?
Yes, thank you, Stephen. I just want to say thank you for the invitation to be here tonight, and it's really an honor to be engaging in this important conversation alongside Maureen and Tula.
Wonderful. Well, we're looking for a really good conversation. All right, so with that, we will start. What will happen now is that I will ask each question and then go through each of the panelists and ask them to speak a bit on how they would answer that question. So our first question for the night is, what is water justice? And with that, why don't I start with Tula and Ngasala? And
yeah, thank you. I think I would define water justice. It's when there's fairness, when there's participation, when there's equity, and just justice in general in addressing ongoing global water crisis. And as we know, there is already inequality around the world when it comes to access to safe drinking water. And so, and the big issue here, we know all that is water scarcity. And it's, you know, it's an ongoing challenge caused by climate change, as we know, human activities, industries, agriculture, and population growth, urbanization, and so on. So it's just, when we talk about, you know, water scarcity, it's not just about the quantity itself or the physical quantity. We talk about the quality. We talk about, we mean accessibility, affordability, reliability, and historically there have been just power when it comes to who can access what type of, the use, the allocation, management, and so with all those with all those power and problems, it complicates to the already bigger problem of water injustice. And so and when it comes to injustice, we can see it affects communities differently. And because the whole, in the world, we don't have equality when it comes to access. And so looking at affecting the well-being in developing countries versus developed countries, it looks different. And even if you look at just developing countries within, we have urban areas, we have rural areas where the situation is different. In areas that we have infrastructure, and in rural areas where they don't even have electricity, we see, for example, gender, how women are the main water collectors and taking care of their families. They are being affected differently, even though it's just the same injustice, but in different ways. Where you have in urban areas, maybe they lack, they suffer through long waiting when it comes to water, or bargaining and water prices and things like that. And in villages where there is no electricity or they don't have infrastructure, they have to walk long distances to collect water. And then we have income, household income, where you just really, it depends on how much money you have to be able to get connected to the water system, or to be able to afford to buy water from the vendors. And in villages where people don't have, the income is very, very low. So that looks different as well. And then we have religious groups too. That is not very common, but it does happen in communities where you have a diversity and Muslims, Christians, and who has a well in their church, and Muslims can access things like that. And we have race and sometimes even topographic and environmental conditions can cause injustice in that way due to access. So that's how I would define water justice, just in that kind of a broader way, mainly looking at the low income communities.
Yeah, so excellent answer. So maybe we can have Emma answer next, and then we'll close out with Maureen Taylor. So Emma, from your perspective then, what is water justice?
Thank you. So I think about water justice as recognition of access to safe water as being a basic human right. And it's really one of the reasons why I like to work in this area, because regardless of any technological advances like AI or other large societal changes happening, like access to safe food, water, and housing will always remain fundamental human needs. And so I like to think about how water justice is intertwined with other dimensions of environmental justice, like food justice, which recognizes universal need for access to safe, nutritious, and culturally appropriate foods. For instance, the work that I did with the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations focused on development of equitable food systems in low and middle income countries, but that often could not be achieved without first having access to safe water in a community. For instance, like if you wash your fruits and vegetables in unsafe water, that can make your food unsafe. Or if you're eating fish from contaminated waterways, that has adverse health impacts as well. And that's something we also see locally right here in Detroit with fish consumption from the Detroit River. And similarly, my previous work at the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy touched on emerging issues related to PFAS, which is important in drinking water, but also in wild foods like fish and venison. So to me, I like to think about water justice as really the foundation of all other forms of justice.
That's fascinating. So we've seen a little bit of switch. Let's move now to Maureen. How would you define water justice?
Well, first, let me bring you all greetings from Michigan Welfare Rights. So humbled to be asked to participate in this activity today. I'll start by saying the spirit cannot be happy in the way we treat each other. Just so many abrasions, so many bad things that happen. And one would think I happen to belong to a Methodist church, and I heard these two wonderful speakers that are spot on in their definition and understanding of water justice, just spot on. But the church I belong to, and all of the preachers, we have 4,017 churches in Detroit. And as far as I can tell, Jesus, Muhammad, they're all about water. Okay. Wash people's feet in it, walking on it, changing some of it into wine, sprinkle it on people's heads, all about water. Every religion I ever heard of. But to be able to pinpoint how it is that in this world, there are so many people that are struggling to get access to water, it just tells me clearly the spirit just has to be unhappy with the way we treat each other. A number of years ago, I got a chance to visit with my family to Disneyland, not Disney World, Disneyland out in California. And Walt Disney and that whole crew has a pavilion and a demonstration activity where they have figured out, that's 30 years ago, how to change salt water into fresh water. And I thought, my goodness, just go ask Walt how to do it. They figured it out already. I think the two speakers have been so dramatic and absolutely clear. But in Detroit, certainly in Michigan, this is not about scarcity. This is about absolute straight up greed, just flat out greed. And so when we talk about this question of water justice, it's very simple for welfare rights. We're talking about people ought to be able to access clean water and sanitation, whether they can pay for it or not. And it shouldn't even be involved in the discussion. So, water justice, in terms of a definition that comes from me, says that you have access to water when you turn it on, the spigot on in your kitchen or in your bathroom, the water shows up. And anything less than that says that you're on the other side of humanity. That's what it says to me.
That's excellent. So we start with three very integrated ways of thinking about this question, right? So Tula really brought us through a lot of the issues, right? And then Emma helped us think about beyond just, does it come out of the tap? How is it related to the food we eat? And then Maureen brought in that this has to be about power and justice, right? Justice has to be about people being able to get access, whether or not they're rich or poor or whatever. So excellent. So let's move then to the next question, which gets us to what the our global community has done. So our next question, and we have a slide for it too, is how is water justice related to the United Nations initiatives such as the Human Right to Water and Sanitation, which was passed in 2010 and has led to a number of efforts to try to think about water and sanitation, and the Sustainable Development Goals, specifically Sustainable Development Goal 6. This comes out of the out of the most recent Environment and Development Conference, and it really set up a goal, and the goal was that by 2030, so we're almost there, we would achieve universal access to potable water and sanitation. And there's been a lot of programming behind that. So the question is what are the kinds of things that in what ways is the United Nations helping us think about water justice? Who wants to answer first of the three? I'm wondering, Emma, since you've worked at the United Nations, maybe you can start us off?
Yeah, I can start. So yeah, I want to say that water justice is quite clearly linked to Sustainable Development Goal 6, which calls specifically for universal access to safely managed water. And I think it's important, again, to like take a broader perspective on understanding access to safe water beyond just drinking water, because Sustainable Development Goal 6 emphasizes the need for access to safely managed water for drinking water, but also for sanitation, such as basic hand washing facilities even. And we saw locally in Detroit how water shutoffs during the COVID-19 pandemic was linked to increased cases due to residents' inability to wash their hands. So I think, again, kind of taking that holistic perspective of all the things we use water for beyond just drinking water is really important. And understanding like the far-reaching implications that access to safe water can have. And I think I'll leave it there, but happy to add more on, depending what Tula and Maureen have to say.
Okay. So why don't we go to Tula next on this one? And this question, how is water justice related to these big United Nations initiatives that we're seeing right now? You're still muted.
Sorry about that. So yeah, I think the resolution, with the human rights, it means that the right to water is universal and must be ensured by the government, whether people can afford it or access it or not. So I think that the aspect of that is it has to be figured out differently depending on the the country and the context by each country. And there are, like I kind of mentioned earlier on the first question, we have different settings where we have developing versus developed, or low income versus high income. So I think that there are critical issues that will have to be considered when it comes to making sure that everyone can open water from their, from their kitchen or bathroom. Like, that's like Maureen said, that is their right. But we come into challenges because when we talk about water, we talk about, quality of, water safety, water quality. We also talk about reliability because, you have to make sure you have it. It's reliable. Anytime you want it, you can have it. Can you afford it? And then availability, accessibility, and things like that. So when you think about communities that, just bringing in an example of low income countries where you have areas that don't have electricity, period. They don't have water infrastructure. How do you bring in water quality? How do you make that happen in those two different settings? Because it's, how does that look like? It might not look the same, for them, for a community like that, maybe being able to walk outside 10 steps and get water from the bucket, for them, that is reliability, but it might look different in cities where they have infrastructure, then they can actually make that happen, in their homes. What about quality? How do you make sure that they have safe water, treated water at home, but they don't have access to water treatment plants, and they're in these villages versus urban? So I'm kind of comparing the two and saying, when we talk about human rights, how do we make sure that the reliability, we can define it the same way for both, for both ends, like if you go to a place where they have to walk so to get water, but water is not reliable because it's seasonal, during dry season, they don't have access, but then during rain season, but then how do you make that, make that, how do you make that system work for them to have water all year round, versus in areas where you can work with the system and the infrastructure to make that happen? So I think looking at the main kind of like a broader definition of water access, looking at the quantity and the reliability, affordability, again with the income, how do you make water affordable in areas that they just putting a system and managing it will be a challenge. Maybe even the literacy is low. Like, how do they make that happen? And so that's how I look at that and say water is a human right, and I think that's a really good resolution. And it's we just have a challenge of how do we really make that accessible for everyone.
Yeah. So the importance of thinking about not just ecological, but also social context, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Excellent. So how about we finish it off this one again with Maureen?
Well, let me again just say right away. See, I'm at a disadvantage. I'm on a panel with persons who are international stars. Okay, Americans are as dumb as a bag of wet hair. Let me just say that. Okay, and we only figure how things are based on what's in front of me right now. So to listen to my colleagues on this call talk about the importance of water in other areas, they are so correct and they're so right. I want to give just a brief context. Uh, we had a mayor in a small city called Highland Park, and the mayor's name was Lindsay Porter, and he served 1992 to 2004. Somewhere around 2003, 2004, Lindsay called Marion Kramer, who is a resident of Highland Park, and said, I need you to come to the mayor's office because I have something to show you. Marion called me. I went over there and got her. We go to the mayor's office, and he has a pad with addresses on it. And he tells us these are people whose water have been shut off. And it was like page after page after page. So I didn't believe it. So Marion and I, okay, we started driving up and down streets, Cortland, Glendale, Ferris Park, all these streets, and knocking on people's doors. And of course, we work with welfare rights. The community knows who we are. And we knock on the door and say, is your water on in this house? What's going on? And colleagues, we heard stories that were so horrific. And it was Marion Kramer out of Highland Park that figured it out. This is the fight we need to get into. I just told her she was wrong because nobody's going to be fighting about access to water. I was so wrong. Fast forward, here comes 2010, the U.S. Social Forum in Detroit, 35,000 people coming from around the earth to get to Detroit. 2 years to get this thing up and planning. And I'm traveling across the country to talk to folks about coming to the U.S. Social Forum in Detroit and the importance of making certain that you don't allow water to be privatized. And that was the subject. And I took it all over the country. Fast forward again. Here comes 2014. By now, I recognize that we got problems. So I'm writing the United Nations, and I had seen that movie, The Shawshank Redemption, and I realized that if you write them and you write them and you write them, keep on writing them, put a 1 at the first letter, 2 on the next letter, 3. I did all of that, and I was stunned when Catarina de Albuquerque called and said, look, we're coming from Portugal, from the United Nations, and we're coming to Detroit. Had to go get John Conyers to get everything ready. And she and Leilani Farhar came to Detroit, and the United Nations put a footprint on the fight we were having about water. We would not have gotten there had it not been for these women who were just totally insulted by the time that they got to the Detroit area to talk about the importance of accessing water. That's the first time, even with my Methodist upbringing, I'm going to say these words, that I wanted to pimp slap the mayor. That's the first time I wanted to pimp slap that guy as he insulted these international women that came to tell the mayor, we don't care anything about your petty squabbles. a candy thing about your foolishness. Water is a human right, and you must make it accessible to everyone, whether they can pay for it or not. That's how we got to the United Nations. Up until that moment, we were in an uphill battle. Once the United Nations came, printed up some documents, made it a global issue, and here comes Canadians from a place called the Northern Territory. I didn't know what that was. Northern Territory. I thought only God lived that far north. But they came and brought water. The Canadians are coming across the bridge to bring water. We got folks from down south, U-hauling water all the way up to Detroit. But it was the United Nations connection that made this happen. We could not have been victorious had it not been for the United Nations. I'll tell you about the Pope's visit later. That's how we found him too. Okay.
Excellent. Well, that's fabulous. So what I hear is that the human right to water and sanitation actually made a difference in the case of Detroit. It enabled the kind of attention that honestly embarrassed our government into having to act at least a little bit, right?
Right. I don't know if you can embarrass these scallywags, but yeah.
I'm not sure. Yeah. Well, so maybe that leads to the next question, and maybe we'll start with Maureen this time. And what are some of the ways that we as a global society have made advancements towards water justice?
Well, there are a couple of things that have happened. Of course, the United Nations visit put this question on the map. So it became an issue. Right after that, right during that time, and that was in 2014, that's when Flint decided to change and not use a clean water from Detroit and put the public water hose into the Flint River. And people started to get poisoned. And we're folks in welfare rights. We're on our way to Flint after some of our members are calling us to tell us that there's something wrong with the water in Flint, and we're taking buckets and buckets and bottles of water all across the country. Judge Greg Mathis, everybody was involved with trying to take water to Flint because it was so horrible. Now, on the way of doing that, it was publicizing how bad this question was. And that it just took the fight to a whole another level. To me personally, one of the biggest shocks I had in delivering water, and people would say, why don't you come in? No. I see you have a great big dog here. And I figure you have a big dog because you have a great big container or a dog something or other on the porch. And people start to tell me, we don't have any pets in Flint. What are you talking about? Say the dogs, the cats, the birds, all of their pets drank the water and they all died. And I thought I don't know how much worse this situation can be. That got publicized. So publicity works a long way in terms of revealing and exposing a problem. We are also now into lobbying these legislatures in Lansing and in the White House and every place else we can go, where we figured out all of these people who are elected officials, they read and write just like we do. We can write legislation, so we do, and write these rules and laws and these amendments and whatnot and submit them in various places to see if we can get some folks to take advantage of the moment. And we've been very successful with that. So publicizing this issue, never relenting in terms of this issue. And the last thing I'll say in terms of advertising, people may have a bad attitude about motorcycle clubs, okay? We went to motorcycle clubs and asked them about those little flags and that you can hook on to a motorcycle, and asked them if they would be willing to put them on their motorcycles, and they said yes. So we had all kind of motorcyclists all around the area with a sign that says water is a human right. And so publicizing, keeping the issue right in front of folks, going down to the local governments, the city councils, the state governments and whatnot, and keeping this issue first and foremost. That's one of the ways that we have been successful.
Wonderful. So let's see. So Emma, do you want to, would you like to answer this question next? What are some ways that we as a global society have made advancements towards water justice?
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, I'll start at the global level then, since you're asking about how we've made progress as a global society. So I think I'll start with there just has been increasing recognition that water is a human right at a lot of these global scale conversations, as we've already mentioned with the Sustainable Development Goals. Or for example, the South African Constitution explicitly states that everyone has the right to access sufficient food and water. And so while these might not be fully realized yet, these sorts of policies and laws help move the conversation forward. And then on the more local level, I wanted to talk about, I just recently read the book, Toxic Debt, An Environmental Justice History of Detroit, which was written by Dr. Josiah Rector. And I highly recommend the book if anyone's interested in learning more about water justice in Detroit specifically. But I think the book shows not only how far we have to go, but also how far we have come. So in the past 100 years on the engineering side of things, as Tula, I'm sure you can speak to in more detail, we have come so far in our ability to treat drinking water. So in the early 1900s in Detroit, raw sewage in the Detroit River, which was and still is the primary source of drinking water in the city, was leading to recurring typhoid epidemic. But when Detroit began chlorinating its water supply in 1913, those occurrences rapidly declined. And so I think it's just worth thinking about how we can implement those. At this point, can be seen as basic, but in other places that don't have those sorts of resources yet, and how much of an impact they can have on public health. And then also thinking about too, just in terms of water treatment facilities and how we're developing this infrastructure in our cities with increasing urbanization. Detroit still operates on a combined sewer overflow system today, which can pose environmental and public health threats following extreme rain events. But this is something we've made progress on, and contemporary urban planners and engineers have a much better understanding of how to design safe water treatment plants, having sanitary or separate sewer systems. So stormwater can be directly diverted to nearby water bodies rather than to sewer treatment plants in storm events to avoid overflow and raw sewage going directly into our waterways. So those are just some things to think about, how we're moving the conversation forward and where we've come from, but how far we still need to go as well.
Yeah. And Tula?
Yeah, thank you. So, just to add to what Maureen and Emma talked about, especially locally with some of the improvements that we have seen. And I just want to say, I really appreciate Maureen, what you've shared about, just the challenges over the years and how you were able to, work so hard to get this water justice. It's just very impressive. So, looking at locally, I can maybe speak on just here in Lansing area. There's a big, for those who, if you've drove around Montgomery Drain in the Frando area, there's a project that started back in 2013, improving stormwater management in general, managing, to prevent flooding and improving water quality, just to make sure what is going back to the river is clean. So that has been going on for a while now, and we are improving. We are just rehabilitating pipes and replacing to bigger pipes to increase capacity, and just making, the cities look better and beautiful, and treat that water at the same time. So using more natural ways to manage and treat at the same time. So when we get back, when water is sent back to the river, it's being received clean. And so that's just one of the big projects that I appreciate that really improves just water management in general. And so globally, maybe I can speak on, I know with data, if you look at UN water website, they talk about worldwide, the number of countries that women participation has been improved, like women in water and sanitation management, in law and policy. So percentage of countries, this is the data that is on their website, that it has increased by 10% since 2000 to 2020. And also the 25% of reporting countries saw an improvement in the extent to which women participate in this water and sanitation management. So I think this is a good news, and especially when we talk about water justice, women is part of it, is a big part of them experiencing this injustice. And then there's other examples out there that are listed. So for example, in Ghana, the coverage of safety managed drinking water services has increased by 28% since 2000 to 2020. And then we have Pakistan, that's another example, and the coverage of basic sanitation increased by 39%. So those are just the examples that there's a progress. It has been 20 years and we still have, our goal is 2030. We are almost there, but at least we are making progress. There's still work to be done. And for for Pakistan, actually, it looks like they're on track to eliminate open defecation by 2030. So that's a good news when it comes to sanitation. And when we talk about women and open defecation, it's such a sensitive, area where when we see improvements like this, is something to definitely celebrate. And then maybe just to kind of add on in education institutions, and I know I've worked with, I've been involved in research with Michigan State, and they have, I think they've done a good job having grants to fund international projects and having their priority areas being gender and inclusion, water, energy, and environment. And looking at education attainment for women and girls, and looking especially in water and sanitation area, how does WASH, affect education to women and girls? So that's just one of the several studies and research that are being supported to do these studies in internationally, locally and internationally. So that's just another thing that I want to mention, that it's a progress, and I think maybe we wouldn't say the same maybe 15 years ago. And and the last thing, just to kind of throw it out there with organization like Engineers Without Borders. I know this is mainly for engineers, and one thing, the main thing they do, they work on real world projects, and mainly in water and sanitation access to low and middle income communities. And and one of the several things actually they are doing very well, and they are kind of directed towards the water justice, because they have community involvement is a huge thing for these projects. When they go to the community, they want to make sure that communities are involved. When they form water committees or community-based organizations within communities to run these projects, they have to have 50% of women participation, or at least somebody to represent women within the community. And then also they have to have 5% contribution, whether it's money or in kind. So these are requirements for these communities to be able to have these projects in there. So I think that's another add-on to, you know, to progress that we have made. And the good thing too about this is these are students and, you know, led by faculties and working with local engineering students as well to work together to make a difference in this area of water access and sanitation.
Fantastic. It's again, three very interesting, diverse responses. Of course, now we can move from the positive um, to the negative, right? What are some of the ways that our progress toward water justice has been impeded or even rolled back over time? But I'm thinking in the last several years in particular. I guess, Maureen, would you like to start us on this question?
Some of the ways progress have been impeded. Yes. This is not a legislative issue, and access to water, clean water, and sanitation should not be connected to who's in office or what party's in office. This is a humanity issue. So what we face certainly in Michigan, oftentimes in Wayne County, is examples of this particular person or that particular person who is not in favor of access. We've got, I'm going to name names. We've got in Macomb County, Candace Miller. Candace Miller is involved with actively fighting against putting up opposition to a water affordability plan. And her thinking is that there are well-to-do families in Macomb County, and there are not people that are in trouble there. And Wayne County has a trailer park. They've got a lot of trailer parks, but they've got those 70 and 80-year-old blonde, blue-eyed women who are living alone and are on water programs that are rationed. And so when Welfare Rights goes out to one of these community events and we listen to this foolishness from this foolish woman who, you know, continues to talk about we don't need that here, that's a problem. And it's that mindset that says water access is a legislative issue. And depending upon what person or what party is in office, that's the way this works. And we have to find a way to lift us out of such barbaric, archaic foolishness. Water is a human right. If you're a Republican, a Democrat, an independent, or if you don't believe in nothing, water is still a human right. So that continues to be an issue. And we always have to have that fight. Certainly in the Detroit area, we always have to have that fight first to convince people that white people can be poor. What? That can't be true. Native Americans may have an issue. What? That can't be accurate. So we always have to fight that cultural war first before we get to the humanity of what we're supposed to be about. Everybody is supposed to have access to water. That is always a barrier, having to fight the cultural aspect first.
So why don't we go next to Emma? What are some ways that progress toward water justice has been impeded or even rolled back?
Yeah, so there's two main points I want to talk about here. First is that according to the World Health Organization, a quarter of the global population is not connected to a managed drinking water source. So that's over 2 billion people. And that means that clean and healthy fresh waterways are still a critical part of this conversation, not just treated municipal drinking water. And fresh waters have become increasingly polluted and degraded over the past couple decades with urbanization and climate change and other anthropogenic stressors. And in part specifically due to the development of wetlands, which are critical for improving water quality through sediment trapping, nutrient removal, and chemical detoxification. And so because of this, I was thinking about certain UN mechanisms like the Ramsar Wetlands Convention, which is named after the city in Iran where it was signed. But the Wetlands Convention has traditionally only been discussed as part of the biodiversity conservation conversation. But I think it potentially has an underappreciated role in the water justice space. And so I've been thinking about how we can leverage some of these other mechanisms or UN resources and maybe creative ways to support this goal of water justice. And then secondly, I think that in the past decade or so, like there has been increasing moves towards privatization of water, which is a huge concern for water justice progress, in my opinion, as drinking water really should be a public service rather than a for-profit enterprise. And I think everybody in this meeting can appreciate why that's an issue for water affordability and issues of access. So I'll turn it over to Tula.
Yeah, Tula.
Yeah, thank you. So I think for me, I like to look at it as community empowerment, because I think we talk about what human right, what as a human right, and I think the community, the people who have right with to this water should be empowered. They should have, they should be able to. It should be they should be part of this to bring this justice to the community. And when I what I mean by that is when community members are empowered to, they know there's an issue going on and they get the support to solve their own problem. Whether it's just by new technologies or knowledge or attitude or practices or investing in them, in the community, it makes a big difference. And I kind of looked at this as, using community capital framework where you have the you use this, you utilize this social capital that is already there. And because all these communities we already have things going on. We have groups of women going on doing things already. They meet weekly for these, I don't know, like maybe village community banking or just small things, entrepreneurship and things that they do every week to for themselves to improve their lives, so they can bring in the issue of water as part of the things that they talk about. And because these are the women, when you bring water issues among women, this is a perfect place to talk about it because they all know it so well. And that can be a platform to talk about, hey, how are we doing this? How are we organizing a fundraising to maybe build drill a well or do something that will help improve the water access. And also too, like, because the leaders within communities or people with authority like church leaders or local government, or those people are, when they are being listened. When they speak, people listen. So they can take advantage of that. And as they meet to talk about community issues, they can bring in water issues, water and sanitation, and involve the community and bridge the gap between community leaders and the government, and come together and say, how are we approaching this issue? And then also there's a cultural capital where these celebrations that we have in our communities, religious celebrations or tribal ones, or like all these celebrations that people meet regularly once a month or once every other month, or those are areas, because water and culture, it's you can't separate the two. So those also can be used as a platform to bring in these issues and talk about them and discuss how are we how are we addressing them. And that could be a place where people are willing to open up and talk about things that maybe otherwise they couldn't talk about or share with their leaders. So And then there's a human capital where education, capacity building, having curriculums in schools that talks about water challenges and sanitation and just public health officers within the community that maybe sometimes they're not known. And I'm kind of covering this globally, and it might look a little bit different if we talk about Michigan, for example, or in other low-income countries. A lot of these settings are mainly in low, middle-income communities, and so and so those are the things that I think can be emphasized, and I don't think they have been. And then on top of that, having the built capital, where now you're bringing in the infrastructure, the water supply systems, the centralized sanitation technologies that are easy to, communities can get together and do them. They're doable. They can be community led programs that can teach people how to do those things. So just to summarize, it's just empowering the community to look at these challenges from a different angle. And I think when you bring them together in that sense, there's something about just having them in one space, not just because we want to talk about water, but taking advantage of already what's there, already things that are happening, and address those, hearing opinions and addressing those issues.
Wonderful. So I think in what I heard from putting those together is that we need to be thinking about the integration between social life and the broader ecosystem and water as we live. And it comes down in some cases to, back to Maureen's statement, could we not say it's about priorities? And I think about that now because World Water Day happens to come this year as we can think of at least 4 devastating wars that are making our global armaments companies rich: Gaza, Ukraine, Sudan, Yemen. But in all cases, we know that those conflicts are in the process of rolling back some of the ability to get to water for people in those places. At the same time, spending all that money on those wars is going to be part of the excuse to get back to your, who was it, Candace Miller, right? Who's going to say, we simply don't have the money to pay for these people to have water because we've been spending it on all these armaments. So I think it is, we have to understand water as being connected to ultimately to security in positive ways in some cases, but lots of times in negative ways. And I think do any of y'all want to comment on that before we move to the closing comments? And if not, why don't we go to closing thoughts? So why don't we start with Emma and then go to Tula, and then we'll finish off with Maureen.
Yeah, I'll keep mine brief so we can open it up to questions from the audience. And Stephen, I also think you just did a great job summarizing some of the things I was going to share here already. But I just want to say that while the core of water justice is first and foremost access to safe drinking water, I also encourage you all to think about all the ways in which water touches your daily life and understand the ways in which water justice underlies many other forms of justice and public health broadly. And again, thinking about that whole systems perspective, the ecosystem, the social systems, social context, and how it's all interconnected.
Yeah, excellent. Tula?
Yeah, thank you. And I just to kind of add on what Emma said, I think to just being aware of promoting awareness to just people around us, starting with our own families, going up, so that they're aware of you know, water usage, the challenges that we experience every day, just being good stewardship and how to conserve water, like things, small things like that, just start from the, you know, from the family level to make people just learn about, you know, being involved in water movements and wanting to learn more about the challenges that people go through every day. I think it's easy for just to hear about Water Day, but then, you know, if someone asks you, what is it? What are you know, just kind of being open about it, sharing about it, and so people can learn more about it and to encourage that, you know, individually, we can start changes, we can start these just conversations from the low level and then keep bringing it up and bring more awareness. And I think that's how changes can happen, big changes can happen.
Excellent. Maureen, would you like to close us off? Final closing thoughts for our audience on World Water Day Eve.
I will. In 2014, when the United Nations came, and we had them here for 2 days, and we put these ladies on a tour bus with some other folks in and around Detroit, and showed them different areas of Detroit. And one of the things that they picked up on, and we just stopped at 4 or 5 places that they knew we were coming. And then we showed them other areas, and they wanted to stop and just knock on the door and see what folks were thinking. Well, a big issue that came out of this 2014 United Nations visit is something that I call family toileting. Okay. And it has to do with what Stephen said, priorities, and what Tula said, and what Emma said. And family toileting is when the United Nations 2 representatives walk into a house and people are very free, come in, say, well, how do you manage this? Because your water is off. And that's when we heard several renditions of the same story. We find out husband and wife, 2 adults, 3 children. The 3-year-old's got to go to the bathroom. You got a bucket there and another bucket. So you let the 3-year-old go to the bathroom first, but you don't let that 3-year-old flush the toilet. Then you go call the 7-year-old and you say to you, come on and go to the bathroom. I don't have to go to the bathroom. Come and go to the bathroom now. And the 7-year-old uses the restroom, and you don't let the 7-year-old flush the toilet. Here comes the 13-year-old. You have to go too. That person uses the toilet, but you don't let them flush. Now, all 3 of the children has used the same toilet bowl. It looks like whatever it looks like. Mom, dad, whoever now wants to use the toilet, and they flush it one time. And this is what happens. And that's why I said earlier, Americans are as dumb as a bag of wet hair. This thing happens all over the world. But the United Nations representatives were able to come and look at this and saw it in multiple households. My sisters and brothers, the spirit, and I'll end with that, just cannot be happy with the way we treat each other. And that means Detroit, Ghana, Gaza doesn't have water. Those are my clients. Ukraine, they don't have water. Those are my clients. Anybody, anywhere in the world that does not have access to water and clean sanitation are members, potential members of Michigan welfare rights. I'll stop right there.
Wonderful. Well, an inspiring message. So we already have our first. I was going to open it up for questions from the audience, and I see that Teresa Alamin has her hand up. Do you want to?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful.
Hey, T.
Hey, sister.
Hey.
I just heard about this earlier today from a member of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom who is here. And when I saw Maureen Taylor was speaking, I knew I wouldn't miss it. Oh, what
All right now.
What a treat. I still think back to 1996 in Cleveland, Ohio, when the National Welfare Rights Union was helping the labor movement understand the importance of the advancement of equality, and particularly the equality of women, so that the leadership of the U.S. Labor Party that year was half women. Thanks to Maureen and Marion Kramer. So I still think back to those times. But I do want to say that it's important for us to put water as a human right out front, because not having the right to water can kill you. I'll be speaking on a panel in a few weeks for the triannual Congress of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom in the U.S. section, which the theme is about water. Interesting. And water is a human right, and water is life, will be my topic. But the importance that we have to know is that if you don't have access to clean and safe drinking water, it can kill you. In Chicago, just in the last few days, they found so much lead in the water. So we think back to Flint, and then we know all the water shutoffs and things that have gone on in Michigan and Detroit. So water has been corporatized. Water has been privatized. I lived in an apartment where I was paying $40 a month for water and sewer. Water, you are being charged for water everywhere. Water is becoming unaffordable. So we have to look at water as life and look at it that it's being privatized and people are being denied access, not in other countries, but right here in the United States, in major cities, everywhere, water is costing too much for people to be able to afford it. So lots of people are getting their water shut off. Lots of people are running into trouble like that. So we have to begin to wage this fight in the reality of the current conditions of water has been corporatized. Water has been privatized. So let's get real clear on that as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Do any of our panelists want to respond? It was a very articulate statement.
Yeah, what she said.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to read a question that's in the chat from Bob Barnhart, who's one of my colleagues here in Michigan. In addition to the negative effects of war on water access, what other ways are our clean, fresh water resources in danger of being irrevocably or at least seriously contaminated? Who wants to take a crack at answering that?
Other ways.
Maybe Tula, do you want to try talking about other ways in addition to war that we are contaminating our water resources? Or Emma or Maureen? Anyone? Tula?
So I just want to make sure I understand the question. So how are other ways that we are contaminating
Yeah.
the water?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the biggest reason I can think about water contamination is human activities, human practices. There's just our daily, lives, and that can be one of the contributors of water contamination. We do also have, things about runoff, rain, a lot of rain, and if it's not runoff, if it's not managed properly, it will end up into our water bodies contaminating water. And now with urbanization, we have a lot of, parking lots and impervious surfaces and a lot of stuff on it. So when it rains, all the runoff is washing all that stuff going straight to our lakes and rivers. So that's another, that's another way of contaminating our water. The way we flush things in our toilets and we throw things in our drain. Sometimes people don't know enough to know there are certain things you can't just throw them in the drain, or it will end up into our water sources, and some of them can't even be treated right to come back, because water is a renewable resource. You can't get a new one. It's the same one that you use, you drink, you flush, it goes back to the river, comes back to drinking. It's just being treated. So there are so many ways that water can be contaminated, but there are also a lot of things that we can do to prevent that. Like I said, or with the projects that are working on managing runoff properly, there are ways that we can treat water before it gets to the river or the water bodies, and the way we just improve our general practices with using water.
Yeah. Emma, you looked like you might want to add to that.
Nodding along and absolutely agreeing with everything Tula had to say. But yeah, I think this kind of tension between development and industrialization and urbanization and industrial agriculture is always in tension, because yes, in some sense we want those things because people need jobs, we need the industry, but on the other side of things, it's leading to habitat destruction and contamination of our waterways. But I tend to think about like the scale of these things. And while yes, individual actions matter because that gives us hope and it gives us power and it gives us control, and that's what we have control over. But I think at the end of the day, it's really like the industries and the corporations who need to be more regulated and held accountable for these things, because the scale of pollution and chemicals that are being dumped into the Detroit River, for example, from all the industry in Detroit, are really the main concern, in my opinion.
Yeah, so I note that Ellen Link has put in the chat that water is the only state without septic system regulations. And it does actually make me think that we make choices about the extent to which we are going to regulate, and the extent to which we are going to enable the pollution of water sources. So yes, we have this in rural Michigan. We have unregulated septic tanks. And you actually can go out and you can see the straight pipes running sewage right into our waterways. But I have to say, I think of touring with Tula a number of years ago, the peri-urban communities in just outside Dar es Salaam, where people moved in and there had been no planning for having for accommodating the sewage, which all those people would eventually produce. And we watched how it contaminated water sources to pretty catastrophic effects on people's well-being, right? Cholera outbreaks, for instance. And so, so it is about thinking that it can be the big things that Emma talked about, industrial agriculture, industrial sources, but it can also be apparently little things like failure to think ahead about what are we going to do with the waste that comes with each additional person that comes into a house, and knowing we can do something about it, but choosing not to effectively.
Yeah, and I think just to add on the septic system, not only the surface water, I think the biggest challenge is contaminating groundwater. When you have unregulated septic systems, they can leak and contaminate groundwater, and that's like I said, it's just the same water, and you have someone 100 feet, 50 feet away that they drill a well to drink for their homes, and when you have your own well, you're responsible for treating it, and without knowing that you have a septic system that is nearby that is not managed properly, you might be drinking contaminated water. And issues of cholera, those are the real signs. When you have cholera, it means you just had a sewage water. That's the just short story of it. So, having the areas that, experience cholera and these waterborne diseases, they are all avoidable. Those are diseases that, it's not a death sentence. It's just about managing the water in wastewater systems. So,
Stephen,
Yes.
this is Alicia. I was a Global Goals Ambassador for UNA USA for SDG 6, Clean Water and Sanitation. And one of the things that I heard the panelists talk about, but I think really needs to be emphasized, is the corporate responsibility. Not only the corporations who are making money off of it. I read this book called Water Defenders, and it is about these companies in South America who interrupted natural water flows and rivers and whatnot just to get to minerals. But these companies are from all over the world, but they have these contracts with these governments, and it's pure, evidence everywhere that it's, damaging the water, the forestry, their plants, their livelihood and everything. But these companies, the governments won't, break these contracts or make any, regulations for them to clean up their mess or make sure there's no contamination just because of money. And it was just a big mess. And that's a good book to read because it just lets you know if it's happening down there, if they find any way of making money, they don't care about the people around them.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good point that we have corporations that are much more interested in extracting money, extracting resources than in protecting our water sources. So I'm afraid I think we've reached, and we did have a nice comment here. Mining, petroleum exploitation, and industrial agriculture are major contributors to drinking water contamination as well. Absolutely. With that, I think I should probably wrap up. Let's give a round of applause to our three panelists. They've been terrific. And now I want to turn over the floor to our two presidents who want to walk us through some of the issues about how we get involved with the United Nations Association. So I can't remember whether it is Belinda or Denise who will take over from me at this moment.
Okay. I wanted to just give a very brief description of the United Nations Association for USA. It started in 1943. A group of individuals in the United States were very big supporters of the idea of having an organization that will work for peace worldwide. And they played a significant role in the development of the charter for the UN. And the United Nations Association, as we know it now, the network, the way it's set up, Eleanor Roosevelt was given a lot of credit for that because she in 1953 went around the country talking to individuals and communities on college campuses also specifically, and garnered a lot of support for advocating for the United Nations. And so as a result of what she did beginning in 1953, we have a system with chapters, both community chapters and campus chapters for universities. And so she is seen as the person who actually set up as a result of her work, set up our system that we have right now for United Nations Association USA, and having people in these chapters advocate for supporting the United Nations. And with that, I'll turn over to Belinda.
Well, good evening again, and thank you for joining us. Thank you to our incredible panelists. And again, I'm Belinda Evans-Ebio. I am the president of the Greater Detroit chapter of the UNA USA. And I've been an active member since around 2018. And I just really trust that the information that was presented by these amazing panelists have added depth and insight to your knowledge base of the importance of water in our lives. Because we know water is vital to health and it sustains life in all forms. So I'm going to talk about the community chapters. You know, membership in the community chapters will give you an opportunity to participate in key advocacy events, such as meeting with elected leaders, to increase knowledge on how the United Nations functions on how to make the world a safer place for all. And UNA USA community chapters, they consist of active leaders and members from across the United States who are passionate about taking action for the United Nations in their local community. I think there are about 200 chapters in the United States, and Greater Lansing, Greater Detroit, and Wayne State, I think we're the only three, Wayne State University School of Medicine, I think we're the only chapters in the state of Michigan. But our chapters are required to elect and maintain a full roster of board members. We have to assure that the chapter has consistent leadership. And then we also have required activities. We are required to complete annual reports. These reports serve as assessment of each chapter's health, providing invaluable information on finances, membership, recruitment, and changes in chapter leadership. And we are required to host an annual United Nations Day event to commemorate the October 24th anniversary of the ratification of the United Nations Charter. And so this event is open to all members and the community at large. And it is aligned with the theme determined by our national office. And with this, chapters are eligible to receive United Nations and United Nations Association speakers. We get toolkits and supplies for any of our events. We have to hold a minimum of 4 board meetings per year. And that's to manage chapter finances, review chapters' business plans, and address the needs of our committees. We must organize a minimum of 2 community-involved programs each year. And these events, again, are open to the whole community. For instance, this United Nations Water Day serves both the Greater Detroit and the Greater Lansing chapters as one of our required programs. We have to have an annual membership meeting that must be conducted, to which all members are invited. And at this annual meeting, the president reports on the chapter activities and shares the business plan for the upcoming year. And so, you know, we are a subordinate organization to what we call the Better World Fund. And so we have tax requirements. And we're expected to comply with all legal requirements imposed upon a subordinate organization, to include a group tax exemption. And both of our chapters, Greater Lansing and Greater Detroit, we are a part of the Better World Fund. So joining a chapter connects you with like-minded advocates who want to voice their support for U.S. engagement with a current focus on making the Sustainable Development Goals a success. We need you. So please consider joining us. And so with that, I am going to ask Pauline George, who is the Greater Detroit Chapter Secretary and Membership Chair, to share the membership levels with you. Pauline?
Thank you, everyone. Just quickly, I am not going to, go line by line because everyone can see the screen here, but You know, there is a level for everyone for participation. If you have family members or individuals that you deal with that are 26 years of age and younger, we consider that the youth membership, and that is free. And there are tons of ways that youth can get involved. This is primarily a youth-driven organization. We are all young at heart, but we have some that are just a bit younger than us in age, and they are equally as involved and engaged as some of us that are a little more seasoned, if you will. We have young professionals, there's a fixed income level, and we also have, you know, levels from standard all the way through lifetime membership. And we have a QR code that's available. So you can, if you are technologically savvy, you can just click that QR code. It will take you directly to the United Nations Association site, where you can complete a membership, or you can go online at unausa.org/join. Please select either the Greater Detroit chapter or the Greater Lansing chapter from the drop down. And if you're so inclined, you can always join via US mail and by check. And that would be to BWF/UNA-USA. And that BWF, as Belinda just mentioned, is the Better World Foundation. And that's at United Nations Foundation, PO Box 96397. And that's Washington, D.C. 20090-6397. So please consider joining. Whatever your passion may be, there's an SDG for the United Nations that will align with your passion. And any community chapter, both Lansing or the Greater Detroit chapter, we're happy to have you. And we are willing to put you to work right away. So please consider joining. Thank you. And I think, am I turning this back over to Stephen now?
Yeah, so I think
right.
I think with that we can call an end to what has been a really fascinating conversation this evening. Thanks again to our three panelists who really enlightened us a great deal about the components of water justice from multiple different angles. I think we all go away with heads full of things to think about. And hopefully with a zeal in our hearts and minds now to try to improve water justice globally, and in fact to improve life, the quality of life for all people, which ultimately is the goal of the United Nations. So thank you all for a wonderful night. Thanks for taking time out of your Thursday evening and joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again in the not too distant future.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you to our co-sponsors.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Great program. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, Stephen.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.